because this is where my problem, listen, if you solve this for me, then maybe I become religious tonight. I think the question at the end of the day is like, there's like one of two different types of people. So like you can either believe that black people are more likely to be adversarial to cops or have higher recidivism or more likely to victimize each other because of like social factors that have contributed to this, that there's like a pretty adversarial history between black people and society or black people and the police, or you can believe that there's some innate quality of a black person that predisposes them towards that. If you believe in the former, like I do, then you seek to reform and move society in a direction as much as you can to make it so that those people feel more accommodated so that crime and other things aren't in the equation for them. If you believe in the latter, then I don't know if you push for eugenics or the deportation of all black people. I don't know at that point like what the plan is, but
A person who, I'm not saying necessarily because that I believe in the latter, but
He goes around debating right wingers. He has a pretty extensive channel. I know some of you know him, but some of you may not. I've seen a lot of his content. I thought he would be a good person to bring on because he's pretty competent. He's a actually pretty good debater. So I want you all to be introduced to his ideas. I know a lot of us get only like the college SJW compilation kind of bit bite of liberal ideas. So I want to bring on somebody who could actually like talk deeply about these things and somebody who could actually like maybe change your mind. So is there anything you'd like to tell us, Justin? Anything about yourself that you'd like us to know? Because I know some of these people here don't know much about you.
yeah, I mean, basically I do politics online.
You're muted, by the way.
Yeah, I know that, of course. Yeah, I knew that. Sorry, I was talking to someone else, of course. No, I typically do politics online. I think my political beliefs could be characterized as pretty far left socially and then pretty center left economically. I'd be most broadly categorized as like a social democrat, basically.
Oh, really? A social democrat?
Yeah.
Okay, so would you align yourself with people like Vaush or Vosh, if that's how you say it, or like Sean and the more like
when you say
socialist
Sean,
side?
absolutely not. No.
Okay, but Vosh you would?
Vosh and me appeared to be close in terms of his stated positions, but Vosh would probably be the closest like socialist type person that I would be aligned with, I guess. Yeah. So we'd probably be fairly close-ish, but there's a couple lines that he'll go over that I probably wouldn't.
So you wouldn't describe yourself as like a typical liberal?
No, I'd say I'm very much a typical liberal. I don't think the typical liberal, at least in the United States, is a socialist.
Oh, okay. So I guess the first topic we'll go over, the most recent topic that everybody should know right now is Dr. Seuss books got canceled, this whole cancel culture thing. And I wanted to get your take on, I mean, is cancel culture a legitimate thing? Is this real? And is it good for us? Is it good to inculcate a culture where canceling happens? Because I know a lot of the right-wing opinion is that canceling is inherently evil and that's bad. And it only happens to right wingers. So I want to get your take.
I mean, I think canceling is pretty dumb generally. I'd say to be very clear here for the Dr. Seuss thing, though, I'm pretty sure they decided that they wanted to stop publishing like 6 of the books that were being put out. Personally, I think it's kind of dumb, but I mean, there's a lot of other stuff we can read besides Dr. Seuss. There's like, I think there's like a reasonable position that you can take on both sides of this, where I would say that like going out of your way to cancel older stuff is really dumb, but like being obsessed with older media and saying that this is the only stuff we can read until the end of time is equally stupid. So yeah, I mean, like, personally, I'm not like a huge fan of trying to cancel old media. I think it's dumb. I think we should be able to see the nuance in it. But then also, I think it's equally stupid when, I guess, generally conservatives like want to obsessively use old media until the end of time. Like, there's probably newer stuff we can read as well that more closely resembles the values that we have today.
Okay, do you think this is canceling is inherently attacking conservatives? Or do you think it's general in the political spectrum?
I think everybody will try to cancel people for whatever they can. I think that right now we typically see it coming more from the left because the left kind of has more corporate power behind them to cancel people. But I think that when the right could cancel people, the right would cancel people as well. And then they do exercise it as much as they can. So like I would say like Trump going after Kaepernick is an example of somebody trying to cancel somebody where he disagreed with the political stance that he had. He tried to get him fired and, excised from the media. Trump going after media can be like a form of cancellation. What's his name? Cernovich going after the James Gunn guy, was him trying to get him canceled. Like, I would say that this happens on both sides, but right now the left is more effective at doing it because they have more corporate power behind them.
Yeah, I saw, I don't remember if this was recent, but I know a lot of your statements got you in trouble with the left. They all came after you. I saw some leftists posting online about how you were secretly a white supremacist and stuff like that I think it was about your Kenosha.
Yeah, people call me, people try to cancel me and everything, of course, yeah. Or I get canceled, yeah, so.
Yeah. So now for the cancel culture stuff, you generally say it's dumb, but do you think there is like a legitimate reason we should cancel people?
So I'm probably more extreme on this than most people. I really don't care that much about what somebody's done. I care more about what I think they're going to do. So, like, the idea of vilifying somebody for mistakes that they've not only made, but they've made and recognized as mistakes, I think is really, really, really stupid. I think that the time to quote unquote cancel somebody is when they've made a mistake that they haven't atoned for, or when they're likely to make those same mistakes over and over again. So, for instance, if it comes to light that somebody had been involved in a lot of like really malicious or bad behavior, then I think that's like worth quote unquote canceling somebody over. It's like Bill Cosby, I think, is a good example of like a whole bunch of stuff comes to light, like this person should be canceled and then also, prosecuted and everything. But I think the idea of like there's like a leader of some organization or that works somewhere and you find out that he tweeted something, dicey like 5 or 10 years ago. I mean, as long as they're not engaged in that behavior now, we don't feel like they're going to do it going forward. I think that's really stupid.
Okay, yeah, I like that opinion. Pretty reasonable right there. So, yeah, I agree with that. I don't know if everybody else in chat agrees with that too, but it's pretty shocking because I know a lot of the typical mind that we have on liberals is that they're all these like crazy, incompetent college kids who have these like outside opinions about canceling and destroying people's lives. So I'm really appreciative that you have these more nuanced opinions and are coming here to talk to us about it. But so I wanted to get on another topic about somebody wanted me to talk about this, but transgenders. We have the Biden has the transgender person as his Department of Health position, and I know a lot of right wingers. I'm sure they have opposing views on this with transgenders, but for the transgender question, do you think that transgenderism is how would you describe this whole gender thing that we've all come upon in this new culture? Like, there's more than two genders, because a lot of the right wing says biology, but I mean, the left wing stance is all we have is like Ben Shapiro videos describe us the left wing stance. We've never really gotten to like a educated left wing opinion on why there's more than like two genders.
So I think the problem, this is like a really complicated question, and it kind of involves the analysis of a lot of things that we kind of just assume to be true, and it requires the breaking down of a lot of concepts. I would say that like on the simplest level of analysis we can do is we can understand that there are a lot of things that have to do with quote unquote gender that I would say are kind of socially defined. So as an example of this, I'm 32. When I grew up, men just don't wear jewelry. It was seen as a very, like, if you do this, you must be gay or, secretly a girl or something. Like, but that's like a standard that we've seen change like pretty significantly over time. I remember in the early mid 2000s, there was the whole like metrosexual movement, and some people got upset by that. Some people embraced it. So I would say that there's a lot of like socially defined concepts related to gender. And if you dig like really deep into the biology, there can be like a lot of strange socially defined parts of even things like sex. So for instance, some people will be quick to point out that like, well, actually we know that if you have an XX chromosome pair or an XY pair, we can definitely say what sex you are. But it's possible that you can have an XY chromosome pair, but have like an androgen insensitivity, and you never present as a male ever. Like you'll have a total like female body through and through, and you won't actually know unless you go and get tested for it to figure out like the chromosome pair. There's a name for this, a W name for this type of condition. Now, some people will point out, well, these are only edge cases, blah, blah, blah. And sure, they can be edge cases. But I think that our understanding of gender and sex can be, if we are like a little bit more nuanced in terms of how we understand it, I think that there is room in our currently existing understanding of reality for trans people to exist. And as long as they're not doing anything that like bothers you, which most of them don't, I don't see why anybody would have a problem with it. I think it gets a little bit... I think it's a little bit of an overreach to try to regulate to other people, how they can identify personally or the types of areas in society that they can exist in. So maybe they're not causing harm to anybody else.
Okay, so would you say that sex and gender are completely the same, or are they two different concepts?
I would say that these are I think these are clearly two different concepts. I would say, yeah. Sex seems to be something that we analyze more on like a descriptive, like biological level. Like here are a couple of facts, and then we've grouped these facts, and then we tend to call one side male, we tend to call one side female. I think that our experience of gender is like a far more socially driven thing than like a hard science thing. Like it's very rare that if I open a biology book, for instance, it's going to tell me men and women can grow long hair and have hairy legs. But when I think of gender, expression, and society, well, it seems to be that we have differences in terms of like who shaves what part of their body and how long somebody's hair grows. So I would say that gender is a lot more socially driven, whereas sex is a little bit more closer to like a scientifically driven concept.
Okay, and a response I've heard to this is that these social responses are inherent in our sexes. And it's not just something that's construed through society, but as a man, we just naturally tend towards the color blue, as an example, or a train as opposed to a ballerina doll. What would you say to this?
There might be some things that are innate to us, but I think I've already given a few examples of how things that we would consider innate have changed over time. You know, I remember I grew up listening to a lot of like Rush Limbaugh and a lot of like traditional conservative figures. And even I remember from my own parents, you know, like having long hair is just kind of a very girly thing to do. But like when you look in the Bible, Jesus had long hair. So clearly our understanding of what it means to be a man or the way that we present as a man, or even for women, you know, how you present as a woman, like these are things that can change over time. I think that anybody that says there's some hard rule here that is innate to human biology would just have to look back, you know, 20, 30, 40 years, and you can see like, well, actually, I guess these things kind of change over time. There's probably like some things that are pretty innate to us where men are probably in general going to tend to do this thing. Females in general, males are going to do this thing. Females are going to do this thing. But I think that these are a lot more malleable than we give them credit for sometimes. And I think we just have to look to our past to see that.
So I guess if we take away the social construction part of it and we just break it down to biology, and the typical conservative is just like, well, even if we accept that gender can sometimes be arbitrary in how we have distinctions, can we still just say biologically there are only man and woman, X, Y, X?
Well, so this gets a little bit more complicated as an answer. So the hardcore reality answer is there is really no such thing, in my opinion, of any category. So male or female doesn't really exist. You can't actually like find like male or female. What we have there's like traits that a lot of people seem to have, and we can kind of group people up across like certain dimensions of traits. So for instance, I could create a trait of people that have like darker skin, or, you know, like super curly hair or whatever. And I could label this something. Or I could find people with certain chromosomes and sex orders and I could label this something. Or I could find people with certain colored eyes and you know, certain heights and I could label this something. So it tends to be that we've created categories called sex, and we tend to group people like as male on one end and female on the other. But these categories, they could theoretically be anything. Typically when we create a category, it's because we find some use there. So we've got a category of male and a category of female, and we tend to use these a lot like socially. But I would say that even though people will argue, you know, like, oh, like these are biology, you know, it's all scientifically driven. The reality is that our experience, even, you know, when it comes to like sex and gender, are very, very, very socially driven. So for instance, you assume the gender of like 99.9999% of people you meet. Like you'll see somebody at a store and you will instantly assume their gender. You don't know if they have like a penis or a vagina. You don't know if they have like real boobs or fake boobs. Like you don't know, like if you're looking at behind, like, but people will make these assumptions immediately based on social traits. Like, well, what are they wearing? You know, how do they walk? What kind of hair do they have? You know, what kind of jewelry are they wearing? How do they, you know, like, so I think a lot of this stuff is more socially driven than people give it credit for. If you want to get into the scientific arguments, then there's two ways to address the scientific arguments. One is we can get philosophical and we can argue that any category is arbitrary. You can have any category you want and group traits together however you want. One way that we've decided to do that is sexually, which is one way we could do it. We could do it other ways. And then the second argument you get into is when you get into the really finer details of how sex works on a biological level, things get a lot more messy the deeper we look into it. The existence of this hard dichotomy, I don't think is quite as scientifically distinct. When you talk to people that study this on a very finite, you know, genetic or biological level or molecular level, as people like to try to pretend it is.
All right, and Tom, you wanted to say something? You can respond to Destiny if you want.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, when you say something like it gets a lot more like grainier at like a biological or a genetic level. It's like sort of silly because from like a molecular level, it's not like nobody's like pointing at a combination of molecules and saying, hey, look, there's such and such category here. There's man there, you know what I mean? There's female there. And so we're debating a lot about the use of language here because you're saying that, because obviously like you brought up, by this standard, really nothing means anything. Like I could say, well, there's really no such thing as a chair floating out in the ether. We're just using the word chair to designate a general category for individual pieces of wood arranged in such a way because that's useful to us. And so I guess what we would have to talk about is really what's at stake in terms of inquiry into this into the rapid
Then
changing of
MC
male and female gender roles. And I
£5.
think that we're pretty well informed by the history of human civilization that like you said, there's variation. I mean, you're saying like, oh, Jesus had long hair. I know that that's not like your full argument. I know that's just an example, but like it does seem kind of like a silly thing to say, because we do see that across all times and in all places there seems to be a general concentration about the tendencies that men and women have in society. And I guess that this begs just a larger question, because you said you're very socially far left, but it seems that there's a pretty negative correlation between our social progress, that is to say, the destruction of all social institutions that we've erected and traditions that we have, and general social well-being. And we're seeing unprecedented, I think, rise in depression and general lack of well-being in society. And this correlates pretty heavily with our purposelessness and the general nihilism that has come on, because you've raised an entire generation of people to say that there is no inherent meaning in anything, and that every category that you might have identified yourself with, family, race, class, gender, nation, whatever you identify yourself as, is just an arbitrary social construct, and you should give those up unless you want to be considered a bigot. And I guess I could just start spamming studies at you, but I mean, it's kind of an inappropriate format to be doing that on. So I won't necessarily do that, but if you have any interest, I can forward you studies I think that generally vindicate my position, if you want to respond to that.
All right, I'm going to go down the list because I wrote everything down. So firstly, when we say nothing means anything, so there's a common mistake that a lot of people make. Just because something is socially constructed doesn't mean that there's not a great deal of power there. All I'm trying to say is to get people to acknowledge that these are socially constructed things. Now, opposite of meaning nothing, social constructs are very powerful. The reason why we create categories is because they usually give some sort of power to our ability to understand things and our ability to provide things that make our lives better, more specifically. So for instance, when you use the example of like, well, there's no such thing as a chair, it's just a blah, blah, blah. Like, I would agree with that. I don't think that universal forms exist. I don't think there is a such thing as a chair, but there is like a general like relationship to parts and pieces in the world. And we call these things chairs, and there's like a utility there. Like we call something a chair because it gives us things to sit on, because we can go to a store and we can buy something, because we can make sure that there's a certain number of these things in our house. Now, I could theoretically create any category that I want, like a stick and a platform, and then another stick that sticks out of a random side, and I could say, oh, well, this is called like a chair boozle, and like I've created one, but I don't really get any utility out of having this. Like I could talk about it to everybody, I could even make people learn about this category, but I don't really get any utility there, so there's no point in it. So like I would argue that like things like chairs, like that concept, it is socially constructed. That doesn't mean it's not real. It doesn't mean that social construct isn't important. Like it provides a great deal of utility to understand what a chair is, to be able to buy one, to be able to have one, et cetera, et cetera. So when we ask the next question of what's at stake, I think that that's always the question that we ask when we talk about creating or understanding categories. And I think it's a really good question to ask because at the end of the day, categories exist to make human life, I think, easier and to provide utility to us. When we create, for a really good example of categories that provide a lot of utility are diseases. One of the reasons why we recognize a disease, we don't just recognize it to just descriptively know it. We recognize it because it helps us understand it and treat it. So if you diagnose somebody with a disease, the diagnosis hopefully comes with like a treatment of the actual disease. So asking what's at stake is important. Now, when I look at like trans people, I personally don't feel like there's much at stake. I guess it depends on your particular like moral paradigm that you look at things through. Like if somebody wants to be a trans man or a trans woman, I don't know if I lose anything there. I don't know if society loses anything there if we have that understanding, which is typically what I look at when it comes to the definition of categories. Now, there are things around the edges that we can argue about, like do trans people have a place in cisgender sports? And I think there's legitimate issues there that you can look at. But like broadly speaking, I don't think much is at stake here if we broaden up a little bit the definition to include trans people under men and women. In terms of being well informed by the history of civilization, I mean, we can look to that for guidance on our future decisions, but we would never accept that it's always been a certain way, therefore it ought to be a certain way. Just because things have been a certain way doesn't mean that that's an argument prescriptively saying that we should do things a certain way. We can find a lot of institutions in human civilization that we probably shouldn't further just because they've been common institutions. The most common example of this would be something like slavery. When we say, raise a larger question, you said there was a pretty negative correlation with social progress. I don't like the term social progress because that seems to imply some like absolute fundamental good that we're headed towards. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. We would probably generally agree where we're headed towards though. And looking at the rest of your question about like general social well-being, unprecedented rise of depression, well-being society, general nihilism, I do agree that these are all problems 100%. I don't know if like just strictly defining gender roles or categories are going to put us back into an area where we're all of a sudden like really happy again. I would actually fault a lot of this with like a rise in technology and then kind of a general sense of purposelessness that we have because we didn't really replace religion with anything of value. I think that we got really good at like the analysis of a lot of underlying structures in society, but I think we were really bad at the synthesis part, that we took a lot of things apart, but we didn't really put them back together in a meaningful way. And I would agree with you that that's a huge problem, but I don't think the answer has to be we need to go back to everything we did before because we're too scared to progress culturally or societally.
You want to respond, Tom?
Yeah, sure. Okay, yeah, no, I agree with you on the point of like social constructs have like real meaningful impacts on our lives. I think the point that I was trying to make there was saying that there are historically what has been categorized as immaterial or in some sense spiritual associations that we make to the essence of manhood or womanhood, that when we say, well, manhood or womanhood, really what this is it's just this purely biological phenomena that has no like deeper value or meaning attached to it. We sort of invented all these fairy tales that we tell ourselves about them and about their roles and about their meaning, but in truth they actually don't have any inherent meaning. They're just material phenomenon. And so it's perfectly fine if you want to be a man or a woman. You weren't actually, because these categories, even though they're socially constructed and within the context of society they have meaning, they don't have any real existential meaning. And I mean, I guess we could just get into like like a philosophical debate about whether or not immaterial like categories and objects exist.
Well,
like,
I guess on that, if you want to go like
or mathematical structures, but
if you want to go like back and forth on just like one thing, I saw like this is something I'm really curious about. If you have like a personal understanding or even like a familiar or kind of like shared within a group of people, like an understanding of like what it means to be a man, and there's some power or strength that you draw from that, why would other people's definitions of that take anything away from you there?
Because if we define it's, I mean, it's the law of non-contradiction. If you define what it is to be a man in complete opposite categories, one of us has to be correct. They're mutually exclusive answers.
I mean, that's
And
not necessarily true, though,
I
right?
think society has shown. I mean, I agree that it is an is-ought fallacy to say that just because something is does not mean that it ought to be. But since you're like a liberal, I can only really speak to you, I think, in consequentialist terms. And so I'm trying to argue about the net consequences for society. And so I'm saying, as a matter of net consequences, we are informed by understanding that it is hard to replace very well in like grandfathered in institutions. And one of them is saying that because you're a man or a woman, this has no like inherent meaning attached to it. That's what I was trying to say there.
Yeah, but I mean, we can still attach all that same meaning. I don't think that non-contradiction has anything to do here. We can all understand that we have kind of our understandings of things within like a certain context, that one person's understandings might be slightly different than another, as long as there's not like discrimination or something that occurs publicly. I don't know if anybody necessarily cares about that.
Yeah, I mean, once again, it is kind of hard for us to talk about this because you're kind of just invoking the harm principle here by saying that so long as it really isn't hurting anybody, then there's no point in. And this is kind of a fundamentally liberal like framework to be discussing it. So it is kind of hard to be having this sort of conversation. But if you define, because the thing is that if these categories are completely relative, then we can define them however we want. So my point there was saying that if I define, if I say that it is not becoming of a man to be wearing rings, and you say it is becoming of a man to be wearing rings, well, if there is any objective fact of the matter, then it would be a violation of the law of non-contradiction to say that both of them are correct.
Sure, I agree with you, but the problem is that if I'm appealing to the harm principle, then we can get a general consensus on who's harmed by a particular thing. If you want to appeal to some objective fact of the matter, my guess is you're going to have to make some like pretty much basically indefensible metaphysical statements that are going to rest on some immaterial fact that I can just deny and you have no way of proving to me. So it seems to be that your argument would suffer there because at that point I could literally posit that anything is the objective fact of the matter. Breathing in too much oxygen should warrant instant death because I deem that to be immoral. And I mean, if we want to talk about an underlying objective fact of the matter that rests on some immaterial thing, we have no way to communicate with each other, no?
Yeah, you definitely are right in the sense of, and this might just beg a more fundamental question about social conservatism, the philosophy of religion, and and how we fundamentally base our societies, because you are right in saying that I can't posit that there really is any inherent immaterial value assigned to any particular category unless I appeal to some sort of more metaphysically defensible position that is more fundamental. So I guess then the transgenderism question becomes sort of, we're sort of speaking two different languages, you know?
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
Okay. Do you want to move on to a different subject then?
Yeah, if you want, or
Unless
I can
anybody
ask you a
else
quick
has-
question on this, just because I'm curious. So,
Sure.
because I used to be religious a long time ago, and then I slowly transitioned over to being an atheist. One of my big problems with religion was that if you reached some incommunicable fact, something that at the end of the day you couldn't argue to another person without either begging the question, so without like sneaking in the conclusion with the question, or without them just agreeing fundamentally with some presupposition you're making, you lose the ability to have that argument. I feel like those positions are really weak. This is why I like appealing to things like harm or well, like general social good or well-being,
Well,
because
general social good or well-being have really no meaning unless you have an objective moral framework that you're working within. And I am of the opinion that unless there is some sort of transcendental, omniscient mind which moves towards some sort of good, then there is no methodology by which we would discern an objective moral fact.
so what would you do if you run against somebody using the same arguments as you do, but their objective moral framework calls for the killing of everybody with like brown hair or blonde hair or something? You
Well,
just have
then
to fight to the death, or?
I would have to look at their objective moral framework to demonstrate that there's some sort of fundamental inconsistency, because I think it is the position of most religious dispositions, if that's what we're talking about, that there's an inherent value to, there's an inherent dignity to the category of human, which cannot really be disrupted like by your arbitrary decision to like kill everybody with brown hair.
Well, but it wouldn't be arbitrary. It would be based on some immaterial understanding that they have. Maybe they believe, for instance, that they're in the Matrix, and there's no way to prove that they're not. That's just kind of something that they just are innately familiar with. Kind of like how some Christians would claim that, you know, they've been like innately inspired by God. Like a presuppositionalist would say that God has revealed them a personal truth, and then they live their life in that way, right? Unless you believe that, like, I guess it's a different argument, but unless you believe that like some religious thought can be like objectively proven to be true, that we can figure out the fact of the matter regarding things like faith or religion, then it seems like at some point we're resting on some assumption that is immaterial that can't be proven to another person.
Well, I mean, there are objective facts in the matter to be discerned in the sense of like from a philosophical matter. If you were to say that something like God like is like God has a cause, or something that just fundamentally violates logic, God has a cause, God both is and is not good, something. So there's objective facts to be discerned in that matter. I mean, if you want to actually have a, because I noticed you denoted that you have philosophy as a primary interest. I mean, I don't see how reaching some sort of philosophical truth is more mutually undiscernible than reaching some sort of empirical, you know, truth, where you said, what if I said, you know, well, why does science have any value? Because somebody could just, you could say to somebody, move out of the way, you're about to get eaten by that lion. And then they, you know, turn to you and they say, well, technically lion doesn't really have any sort of existential category that you could categorize it by. And so I really am not, you know, right in making any sort of judgment about whether or not this thing does participate in this socially constructed arbitrary category of lion, and then be able to deduce the nature of the line and what it will do from that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily agree. I don't claim to have like any objective claim or hold over like moral statements. I just kind of appeal to some like pretty basic traits that I think that most people share, and then I go from there. But I don't make any like strong or stringent meta-ethical arguments. I leave all that to the side because I don't think that any of that is knowable. But I think like most people at some fundamental level will agree with what I'm saying. But I think it's much easier to get somebody on board to say that like, okay, well, let's just start from the assumption that like everybody wants to be like healthy and happy, and let's move from there. I think that's a much easier starting point to start as on some like axiomatic level, as opposed to, well, okay, well, let's assume there's a God, because
So
that seems to imply so much further.
So then let me ask, do you think that meta-ethical statements are principally unknowable or practically unknowable?
Well, if I believe that they're if I believe they're practically unknowable, wouldn't that mean that I know that they're unknowable in principle? Or I mean, I guess somebody could know them, but I mean, I would say they're practically unknowable. We don't have access to any of them.
Because my question is then, if you say that I can appeal to some sort of ethical statement, but I could never really discern the truth of a meta-ethical paradigm, then wouldn't this just sort of be like, wouldn't this sort of just be self-defeating? Because then you're presupposing at any given moment that the ethical paradigm that you're appealing to could be principally incorrect.
Theoretically, Yeah, I mean,
meta.
theoretically it could. In terms of like ethics or morality, I don't think that there's ever an underlying fact of the matter, or if it is, I think it's inaccessible by humans. Like for instance, if I see one person murder another person, I don't think there's an underlying fact of the matter of right or wrong. Or if there is, I don't know how anybody could determine such a thing. We don't have a sense organ for morality or ethics, and it doesn't seem to be, I guess, unless you're Kantian, that there's like a way to, rationally arrive at the idea of like this is right or wrong. I just make broader appeals to like these are things that people like, these are things that people don't like, and like we can kind of work towards a society where we're satisfying maximally the amount of things that people enjoy. And I think that as we're all humans, we all kind of share a
Let's say that
foundation.
there was a subset of society. Let's say there was. I mean, this is the Nozick's pleasure machine problem, which is that let's just say that there was one person in society that reached such an unbelievable utility, like an unbelievable maximal utility, experienced a sort of pleasure or experienced a sort of satisfaction that was so unbelievably great that it outnumbered every other person. But the only way that they could achieve it is by killing everybody else. Then wouldn't that be morally justifiable? Because what you're appealing to is the common principle that makes everybody happy, but this guy's happiness outweighs everybody else's happiness just because of the profundity of his happiness. And so I don't understand why there's any value in assigning to like a net, if like, if 50 plus 1% of people deem that something is happy to some certain extent, then that gives it inherent value, whereas what is the difference between what I'm proposing now?
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to dig like pretty deep into our normative systems, but I mean, like I would argue that you would have to have a very narrow reading of any type of utilitarian principle to arrive at that. Like I could very easily make systems of utilitarianism that have that understand something like marginal utility, which is even understood in economics, right? Such that like the next point of utility assigned to one individual person is never going to be at a point to where it's going to outweigh the rest of society, like practically speaking. I mean, like we might be able to construct some insane hypothetical where that could be the case. So like, for instance, maybe one person needs to eat a cheeseburger to survive, and eating that cheeseburger will kill a million other people that are on like the edge of death's door anyway, maybe. But like realistically, I think that we would understand like just like money, right? If you've got a person with $1 million and 5 people with $1, like if I have to give $1,000 to somebody, that $1,000 isn't going to be the same given to every person because there's a marginal utility attached to that $1,000 given to the person with $1 million. And then I would argue that there's probably, if we were to look at like a utilitarian framework, there'd be a marginal utility to happiness as well, where doubling one person's happiness doesn't mean that you can zero another person's happiness. It doesn't directly translate like that. But
you're giving, I don't even know how you know that, because the experience of happiness is pure qualia. It's not like you're like what are you going to do? You're going to like examine like brain states and see how stimulated people get from like eating cheeseburgers. And also this also just begs another fundamental question, which is, why is happiness good? Like why isn't it not that like suffering is inherently good? I mean, you're like appealing to just these like general principles that I don't think have like genuine moral weight behind them. And then you say, and it's important that we talk about this because you're appealing to these moral principles that I don't think have any weight behind them, but they're like sort of like, live and let live. And then the consequence of live and let live is that you have an entire society that doesn't think that gender is a real thing and that there's any inherent purpose to their lives. So
yeah, so in terms of like how do you know utility, I mean, we can only make guesses, right? As you rightfully point out, no qualia is knowable from one person to another. So I mean, like we can only make guesses to that based on our own brain states, and we assume that other people operate in similar brain states. When you say like why is happiness good, I don't claim to make any like factual statement around that. I just assume it to be true, and then we move from there. I don't think that you can ever make like statements about things are good or things are bad. I mean, like you're obviously going to have to make a lot of assumptions to get my system off the ground, but I would rather make those assumptions and be honest about making those assumptions than pretend that I've divined some truth out of some really old holy book. I think that that's a far more silly thing. And I think it gets you into scarier areas as well, because at the very least, my moral system is a collaborative one that I would have to work with other people to reach mutual agreements on, whereas another person's moral system can be much stricter and much harsher. And the penalty for me being incorrect in my moral system is that another person could theoretically argue me out of it. The penalty for another person being incorrect in a moral system, if I was religious, is apostasy. I might just kill them because they're wrong. And I cannot be convinced in any other way out of my moral system because I believe in some immaterial thing to be true that can't be argued against unless it violates some logical principle or whatever. But we can construct a ton of logically consistent religious systems that, give us a lot of really bad outcomes. So I don't really appeal to moral principles. I just kind of appeal to this broader, like, this broader, I guess, to borrow from Sam Harris, unfortunately, this broader like landscape of happiness or well-being, where we can kind of like measure that like there are certain states that people exist in, and like we try to just maximize what every individual thinks is like the best state. And it's not perfect, but again, like you can say absolutely nothing insofar as to speak for the existence of any higher power. Like there's just no good argument there. So I mean, like I would abandon that immediately, and I would try to move towards something a little bit more reasonable.
All right, man. I mean, this is sort of, let's let Spider say something
Yeah,
because we've been
Spider,
going
you can
back and
speak now.
forth.
Whatever your question is.
Awesome. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
Perfect. You know what Tom said, it just made me think, I personally, most of my life, I identified as an Orthodox Christian, kind of moving towards, agnosticism. And I was just thinking, as societies developed through time, through tens of thousands of years, different tribes of people experience different difficulties and come up with different solutions, just the same way I would, come up with a different solution than someone else to a certain problem. And it is these solutions put together that kind of create a code, a system of people. This is what you should do. This is what you shouldn't do. And this is how you would be happy, because this is just how things have always been. And that kind of contributes to the different development of moral systems and religions across worlds and cultures. And I've just got a quick question for both of you guys, with globalism, expanding rapidly with travel, people experiencing different cultures and, ideas mixing and matching and people being open to more and more ideas than previously before. How do you think all these different how do you think all these different, systems that could be radically different, how can they kind of find peace with each other? Do we have to come up with a new moral system, a new religion, a new idea of God? What's your guys' solution to this?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, you can go first.
Sure. So like, I think that the goal of my system is to kind of reduce everybody's like happiness to some area where we can communicate it to one another. So I think that there are some fundamental like liberal values that we can reduce to that should work for most things. So for instance, as long as you don't infringe on the freedom or the right of any other person to believe in something that they believe in, and as long as that belief doesn't bring about like a harm to another person, like an actual harm to another person, then I think that we can kind of like begin working from there for different principles that we might hold in society. So if somebody wants to be religious and they want to go to worship at, like a temple or a synagogue or a mosque or whatever, then I think they should have the right to do that. That should be fine. They can live their life in that way if they want. But, like if people want to start, like mutilating, children's dicks or whatever, or if people want to, discriminate against who they can have, like working at a place of business that's receiving tax benefits in society, then I think that we have to step in here and we've got to regulate a little bit more. Like, well, hold on, like this particular decision might be good for you, but collaboratively, societally, we can't have people choosing to discriminate in these ways or committing these types of harms, because if we allow one group to do it, we have to allow all groups to do it, and we might descend into chaos at that point, unless that group is ready to like go to war to defend their idea and kill everybody else that disagrees.
All right, Tom, you want to respond, and then we can move on to the next topic after this.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of a dead end. Like I can just say, I do not. I think that there are very good reasons to believe in immaterial things, truth, beauty, goodness, the existence of the soul, these immaterial categories that were just sort of presupposed by people until you have these like enlightenment revolutions of thought. And I think at a fundamental level, if I'm saying, well, actually, I think that there's an omniscient mind, which is necessary in order because all actions aim towards some kind of good, and so God includes aiming towards some kind of action. And so God, being omniscient, deems what is good by aiming towards the good inherently for all time. To like make that sort of leap and be like, well, the only difference is that like my moral system, where I just say, where like my belief in, like, I don't really know, like like moral neutrality or whatever, or just like my belief in like literally no like objective standard, has more profundity to it, or gives more possibility for genuine human freedom, whereas that system that I just described like allows you for like killing apostates and like mutilating like the baby's genitals, and like we're just gonna tell what the and like the only good in society is like pleasure, but we can just sort of tell by like and we can like tell because like brain scans. It's like, I don't know, we're sort of, it's sort of a dead end in terms of moral philosophy. I would love to actually just debate you like about the existence of God or these sorts of immaterial categories, but let's just go and play on consequentialist terms and discuss a different topic through the lens of some sort of consequentialist like general
Sure.
ideas.
Something that
Yeah,
I'm
I wanted to
actually
get to the.
real quick, one
Okay.
question I have on the end of that. So like, let's say that you have, because this is where my problem, you know, listen, if you solve this for me, then maybe I become religious tonight. Let's say that two people
Love
view,
you too.
two people are listening to a song, and one person says, this song is more beautiful than this other song. They're comparing two songs. Let's say that two people have a disagreement on over which is more beautiful. If beauty is real, what can they ever do to resolve this down to one person being factually correct and one person being factually incorrect? What is the underlying fact of the matter here regarding something like beauty?
Okay, well, first of all, we would have to set a definition of beauty. I would say beauty pretty much basically is when it's a state in which one reflects upon an object and determines its in such a fundamental level that they just feel like the inherent goodness of the object, which is I think a pretty like Catholic answer to what beauty is, but like it's just this fundamental perception of the inherent goodness of an object.
Okay, so how would you resolve the difference? So one person has a concert, a concerto, or some orchestral piece. Another person has a piano solo piece. Like, how do you resolve which piece is more beautiful? How do you agree on the underlying fact of the matter here? How would you even access that?
Yeah, it's gonna sound completely ridiculous if you don't have like I feel like an objective morality, like you don't think that there's some sort of like transcendental good that like human beings teleologically aim towards, but you could discuss ideas about the inherent like goodness and cohesion of certain qualities. So for instance, let's take like a beautiful painting or something like that. We could debate about the inherent goodness of the painting based off of principles like symmetry and cohesion, which so intuitively convey to us a sense of a structuring of order that conforms to certain categories of understanding within our minds. That is just so intuitively beautiful that like even if you've sort of like and I'm not gonna say and like I don't think that like I think that beauty becomes like I think kind of an acquired taste. You have to understand certain principles going into observing objective beauty. Like just because it's like a just a fundamental like you just make a declaration like oh that's beautiful doesn't because if we're saying that something is objectively beautiful it's prone to error in the same way that you like could say like somebody could say like oh like I don't believe in like a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Like that's not true.
Well, the
But
problem
then you'd say
isn't.
that's wrong.
So I reject the mathematical example because mathematical examples tend to be true not as a result of their goodness, but because they adhere to some logical consistency. So I reject math here. This is why I very clearly am looking at beauty because I'm curious how you resolve a disagreement in beauty. So you say that we're looking at one of the categories or one of the factors you brought up was like symmetry, right? So let's say that somebody redoes the Mona Lisa, so she's looking at the painter head on, and you can see her head on, and one person says, well, actually, I think that the way when she's looking at it from the side, with her left shoulder in the front, I actually think that that's a more beautiful picture. How could you resolve the difference between these two people? One says, well, this is more symmetrical, so it's clearly better. Like, is that really true? Is that like I don't see how you ever resolve like differences in
there's also it's because you're right in the sense that math is a very explicit thing whereas beauty is a very implicit thing, and so it's hard to resolve the difference in objective aesthetics. But the point of math here is to say that if we were to say that there is such a thing as objective beauty, then a difference of opinion would not actually like differ in the conceptual content of like the objective beauty, like whether or not it is actually contained within that. And another point, so you're right. So symmetry is only useful in so much as what it represents, which is unity and cohesion. But there's also this aspect in terms of like what a thing is beautiful in as much as what it sort of spurs your internal like motion for change, yearning towards some kind of good. So like we would say that like when we look at like a toilet being put in on like an art gallery, you'd say, well, that's not as beautiful as something as like a painting that is like depicting an epic battle, or like a statue of David, which like represents like kind of like the perfect form of a man, or something like that.
So yeah, so like I feel like you have contradiction in here. So when you say when you said one definition, I think this is really scary. When you say spurs your internal motion for change, yearning for some kind of good, that sounds highly subjective to me. So for instance, when you bring out the example of a toilet being put in an art museum, right? That like, let's say that you have somebody that goes into an art museum and they see a painting or a statue of David and like, wow, that's amazing. Like, geez, that's just so cool. I don't think I could ever do something like that. Let's say that somebody sees a toilet and they're like, wow, like I've never actually considered that maybe art can be something different than this, and that spurs them on to create more art, and maybe some of that art actually ends up being, you know, more beautiful than a statue of David. It feels like you're kind of resting on some subjective definition here of what beauty is, that internal motion for change, because that's going to vary from person to person.
It's a definition on the good that they're aiming towards, I think. And so if the good that they're aiming towards, we could say in a sense that that like the thing was like okay, so we say that there's this definition of objective beauty, and then we say that the definition of objective beauty is that, like, let's just say that it was spurs your soul towards yearning for the good. Now let's say you like observed a toilet, and in some way, for some reason, it spurred your soul towards like generating more art. In that example, I think there's a case to be made that like the perception that you took away, the perception that that was beautiful, and that led you to yearn towards more beauty. But I don't think that, but I think that there still is a fact of the matter of whether or not the thing in itself, like the object in itself, like the object in question, has some sort of end in mind by the creator, which is to like yield some kind of like to yearn towards some kind of objective beauty. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I guess I would just go for music. So art conversations are like very near and dear to me. So like I disagree with almost all of this. Like end in mind by the creator. I mean, as an artist, I have to believe in the death of the creator. Like art is incredibly interpreted by everybody that observes it. You know, like that fountain example is a really good one. I don't know if you're intentionally bringing that up or if you just stumbled upon that, but I know that a lot of people that try to be, I guess, realists when it comes to concepts of beauty will say, remember when people put that, when they put that fountain in the, oh God, I'm trying to remember. I think it was in New York, I think. I don't remember the hall or whatever that it was presented in. And people were like, oh my God, like that was a destruction to art. That was horrible or whatever. But I think the goal of that was actually to challenge people's understanding of what art is and what art can be. That urinal was like expanding people's concept of the types of works that they could do and have it be considered art. But like you've taken it in a totally different way to where like for you, and a lot of people look at it as like you're disgusting. You're just you're making a mockery of art, right? And I don't know how you can resolve at the end of the day down to some objective fact of the matter when it seems to rest more on like the subjective inner workings of a person's mind. I just don't see how that can ever be resolved. It doesn't seem to be the case.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is kind of this is also kind of like we came right out of the gate talking about like objective morality, objective like beauty and etc.
Yeah, sorry.
And these sorts of it's these areas like rest on a lot of presuppositions that it kind of seems that and which many of them are like mutually incompatible. But I think that there's a commonality of human experience. I think that when people say, like once again, we're talking about beauty, which you're right is so perceptual. And the thing is that perceptual experience is probably the most fickle form of like sensory experience is probably the most fickle form of reaching, I think, at least in my terms, truth values.
Yeah.
And so it is definitely a hard thing. But I would say, so when I say objective goodness, I'm using this interchangeably with the idea of the definition of God. So I say something is beautiful if it spurs you to God. And if that happens to be a toilet, well, then, you know, I'm not going to say that like, but I'm not going to say like, you know, I think there is a commonality within human beings that they can say like, okay, a toilet isn't really like lifting your soul towards objective beauty, which is why we're even having this conversation in the first place, because that's a very unintuitive standard. And the whole point about beauty is that it's an explicitly intuitive thing. When you see it, you say, damn, that's a beautiful thing. Sorry, I mean, if can we say damn on your channel?
You can say whatever you want on my channel. I understand what you're saying. That's just a very unsatisfying answer to me, because essentially we're just begging the question at that point. Beauty is something that spurs you to God. I don't think most people would have that definition of beauty. And if we define beauty in that way, then it's like, oh, well, okay, that's not exciting. Like, because when somebody says like, I can give you factually, I can tell you the underlying fact of the matter of what object is more beautiful than another, then it's like, oh, whoa, really? That's like a crazy statement. What's that? It's whatever drives you to God. Like, oh, okay. Well, I guess like a really important like Bible or statue is going to be the most beautiful thing.
You're saying, okay, well, it drives, well, then because I said that I'm using God and goodness interchangeably here. So we'd have to define what goodness is in order to say like, wow, no, that is really cool. And the way that I would see goodness is, I would say I would define goodness generally as like, well, the final goodness that we are supposed to be achieving is like, I think pure pure like rationality, like pure contemplation, and that's aided by virtue. And I think that, so I think virtue and like rationality like go hand in hand towards reaching the final like goodness of the human being. And so like when we see the cohesion and unity brought on by symmetry, that's of like a very rational structuring to things. And or if we see acts of heroism, or like, you know, a painting of, I don't know, like the crucifixion or some like massive battle or something like that, we say like, wow, this is like this really drives me towards trying to like be more in harmony with nature. And so I think that that's but would that probably all sounds like kind of like wishy-washy nonsense.
Well, it doesn't sound wishy-washy. It just sounds entirely subjective. Like different things could drive different people towards God in different ways. Somebody might see a scene of a battle and be like completely and totally put off from ever like engaging in that type of stuff. Somebody might see a scene of like a doctor and say like, well, hold on, actually, I think I could be a doctor in the army, and that might drive them toward. Like, I'm just saying that all of this at the end of the day is going to rest on our own subjective experience. It's not going to be a rational or logically driven process.
I will say though that from the way that I see it, human beings possess the same fundamental faculties of reason, and so the thing about beauty is that whatever approximate answer we could come to must be a very intuitive one. And so when we change, like when we say like, oh, look at like when we play all these sorts of like mental games about what beauty is, well, we're kind of fundamentally missing the point, because it's supposed to be just a super intuitive process. And I think that there's a commonality of experience. Like, yeah, it is supposed to be a quote unquote subjective process in the sense of a subject is supposed to encounter an object and then have a very intuitive feeling about that. And I think there's a very serious commonality of experience that when human beings come across certain things, we generally say like when we see a sunset or like when we see a waterfall, because we're seeing like nature, we're seeing something like, you know, nature in action, and we see like the logical structure and harmony and ordering of the world, and we're like, wow, that's like just so like breathtaking, that's sublime. And so when we start playing like these mental games where we're sort of divorcing beauty from what it is, which is just like just this breathtaking experience. And I think that when people see a toilet, very few people, unless they're consciously engaging in an unintuitive process of rationalizing and etc., they will never be really driven to beauty.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to go back and forth this forever. I don't want to hijack this whole into philosophy thing. But like, I would just argue that like within that definition you just gave me, it was loaded with contradiction. So when we say, for instance, that these are like fundamental faculties of reason, when it comes to art, it's actually exactly the opposite. I don't believe that we employ any reason when it comes to an evaluation of art. I would agree with the other thing you said, that it's very intuitive and experiential, which I would say are different necessarily than like any faculty of reason. We don't apply any type of reasonable process or logical process. We don't employ these when we're evaluating art. You could be trained to do so, but I think generally it's just an experiential thing, which can be subjective from one person to another.
I agree. What I was giving an example of was the highest good, which I would hold as like the highest good for human beings is sort of like contemplation, I would say, reason. Okay. And like and that's what I was meaning. If it spurs you into contemplation, then this is probably an example of something which is beautiful. And I think divorcing it from this very intuitive understanding is just really defeats the point and makes it not very beautiful.
Gotcha. I'll give him the final word on that so we can move on.
All right, thanks. All right, let's move on. And if you want anybody else to speak, you know, you can.
I want to move on to the next topic about white privilege and systematic racism, reparation, all that stuff. So I'd assume most people here don't believe that whites have any sort of supremacy or any sort of privilege in our society today. I'd even argue that some of the people in here probably believe that whites are repressed by today's society. And I want to get your take on that, Destiny. Do you believe in that America is fundamentally white supremacist, or that there are like systems in place that empower whites over minorities, or like any sort of like legalistic or like systematic in like systematic principles or any sort of like laws that uphold whites and put minorities down?
So I think we have to be really careful with our terms. I don't think that America is fundamentally like a white supremacist nation. I think that's a pretty extreme claim. I don't think anybody could really justify that. When people are talking about privileges, I think that generally, we're talking about like a set of unearned advantages that somebody has. And this might be like an advantage that you have positively, like people treat you in a positive way differently. And it might be a negative advantage, such that you're not treated in a negative way like a lot of other people around you are. So I think in that sense, if we look at it from that framework, I think that it's pretty obvious that as a class of people, white people seem to have a few unearned advantages. If we want, I guess we can look specifically through the lens of like criminal justice is what most people tend to look through. I would say that we've done a really good job at addressing a lot of the differences of this over the years, so that at the very least, like socially, a lot of these things seem to have subsided a great deal, but there's still a lot of issues that go on related to like black people or Hispanic people related to the United States, whether it's, people discriminating against people when it comes to hiring practices based on your name, or whether it comes to people like getting fundamentally different treatment in the criminal justice system.
I guess a question about this would be so the part about systemic is that it would implicate that it's intentional, as if like the people who run the criminal justice are intentionally displacing or putting under blacks. Do you believe that there's like this like section of whites, or this like intuitive white feeling, or this white feeling that's just kind of generated over the history of America, that they've seen themselves as sort of this higher race that can put down blacks, is why cops would go into minority neighborhoods?
Nope. So, and I highly encourage you as Republicans, anytime you hear a liberal say that, you should beat them over the head with it, because it's the stupidest fucking thing that's ever been said in the world. And liberals misunderstand very commonly their own definitions of systemic racism. And you hear it all the time when it comes to them discussing their criminal justice system, that it's all these racist cops, racist judges. That is absolutely the exact opposite of like what a systemic injustice is supposed to be. A systemic justice is something that's supposed to exist because at one point it was implemented, and it causes unequal outcomes on a group of people just based on some characteristic that it shouldn't be acting on, but it doesn't require any individual actor to be a racist. So you could have a criminal justice system that enacts like a systemic harm among certain groups of people, but no individual actor necessarily needs to be a racist for it to enact those harms. Anytime you catch somebody saying that systemic racism means that all of the individual actors or the majority of them are racist, you should beat that person over the head, because it's absolutely not true. And it betrays our understanding of like how systems work, that they can work on their own without any individual bad actor, causing bad outcomes.
I guess that would beg the question with you talked about the criminal justice system with police going into neighborhoods. We would assume that these are like individual actions of police officers going into these neighborhoods and arresting blacks in some sort of racial fashion, and not that like the certain legal laws of Tennessee or Texas are enacted against minorities. And I think that's kind of what the liberal is getting at, is that when these police officers go, it's not something that's historical. It's something that's happening right now, that the police are going in there right now. And plus it's historical too, is that the police are in their minds or some sort of intuitive upbringing that they're being racially charged against minorities.
Yeah, so I think that like we can look at certain policies in the United States and we could say that these policies don't really have good reason to exist, and they kind of further from some forms of systemic injustice. So a really common example would be like the DEA and our drug scheduling, so like the war on drugs. Now, it seems to be the case that reported usages of marijuana are similar between white and black people. However, because of the neighborhoods that police are policing, even if there are for somewhat legitimate reasons, the neighborhoods that are being policed are more often policed in black neighborhoods, and the chances of you getting caught for some non-relevant offense, if you get pulled over for speeding, you've got marijuana in your car, is going to be higher if you're a black person, just by virtue of you being black and where you live and everything. So in those cases, we would say like, well, these are laws that are kind of like, they have like racial outcomes, or they are a form of systemic injustice, even if the cops themselves don't necessarily have to be racist. You can get a good cop that wants to walk a beat or do their job and just pull people over and arrest people for doing crimes, but because of where we point the legal system at, it ends up in some like nonsense, like outcomes that are like disparaging between race people for no good reason.
Okay,
so then, Destiny, how do you solve that then? Like, how do you combat a law that you may not know its outcome, even if it's applied evenly to everyone?
I think it's really important to look at how some laws can be implemented, and then just look at the outcomes of those laws to see if they're achieving the outcomes that you want. So I really like guns. Here's like a really strong argument, in my opinion, against gun regulation. If you talk about implementing like HB, I don't remember there was a resolution in front of Congress recently, and it was really bad. It was really dumb. It had a lot of crazy law shit in it, a lot of crazy regulations. The idea of making people pay a yearly fee to hold a like federal gun license, even if we think it helps gun control, blah 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 blah, like this law is like pretty discriminatory against poor people in terms of owning firearms. And depending on where we implement these laws, they could be like pretty like racially discriminatory as well. You know, like if you implement a law in some city that discriminates against low-income people and 95% of your low-income people are black, then like you arguably, you know, like you're basically targeting a group of people with a certain law, which is not good. That shouldn't be our goal. Or, you know, very commonly, if we talk about some forms, so that would be like one argument against like this form of like gun control. Like, well, when you implement this form of gun control, like one, there's not good evidence for this actually helping anything. And then two, you're disproportionately targeting like a section of the population. I think this is probably not a good thing. Another example is like in forms of voter ID laws, where sometimes people will implement forms of laws to help with like voter ID, but we find out when we look at these laws that like 98% of the people targeted are black people, that they're only shutting down black polling stations, or they're moving laws around just to make it so that black people are having a harder time to vote. And if we look at the implementation of that law, even if it wasn't done with racial intent, if it has like a really negative racial outcome, we would need a really good reason for that law to exist. Otherwise, it would be like suspect. Like, why do this?
Okay.
Right.
Now,
I've just got a quick question for you. I kind of want to pick your mind here a little bit. I mean, personally, you know, I think the United States is a great nation, but just like any other country, it's not perfect. It's had its dark patch, right? We all know blacks are oppressed in the United States. You know, it's just a fact. And obviously, I believe right now we've made a lot of progress in it, but, you know, the whites in the United States have had a much better, you know, a much better advantage when it came to a more equal society. You know, they previously did not face as many restrictions as blacks have, right? And, you know, a rich person and a poor person, you know, no matter what their race is, they both equally have the right to free speech. And, you know, but a rich person can make their voice heard a lot more better than a black person, right? And, you know, let's just say a lot of, you know, whites who, you know, have generations of established family with, you know, wealth and businesses and all that. And then, you know, it was I kind of lost where I was going to go with this, but, you know, how do you kind of make things equal without making one side lose? You know, how do you kind of make both, you know, give blacks a better starting point than whites, as, you know, when they haven't had as much of a better start from the beginning. You know what I mean?
I mean, I think that it's
kind of thought stuttered a bit there, but it's all good.
Yeah,
You know
no,
what I
that's fine. I think like it's good to find ways to support people, and that this can take the form of a million different initiatives. So, for instance, like setting aside special federal money for historically black colleges, or, you know, preferential loans for black business owners. Like, I think these are good ways to help black people, or any minority group that might be disparaged, to kind of like get ahead further. I don't think many people push these anymore. I don't think that like the one-to-one affirmative action pushes are a good way to do it. So for instance, you have to have, I think in California, I think just recently, they either were trying to pass this or they passed it so that like every single board had to have one woman on it. Like, I don't think that these types of laws are good. I think it's better to work at a more fundamental level rather than at the very end of the system. So like providing more funding to black schools or black neighborhoods or black businesses, I think those are really positive ways to go. Trying to take away funding from or take away positions from majority power holders to just give them de facto to minority power holders, I think it's kind of a bad way to go about things, generally speaking.
I guess a critique of this would be is that recently, especially so recently in the years, is that whites have been felt as if they're being specifically targeted by these laws that are made to help minorities, of the rise of Richard Spencer and Nick Fuentes and all these people. Is that they see these laws as discriminatory, as a reverse of the system, an inverse of how America would be. Is that now these systems that helped them in the past are now all coming back to harm them and displacing them from their jobs or works, or they'll have like they'll say a minority got into this college because he, by virtue of him being black, and he got a much easier chance to get in this college, but because I'm white, I have a much harder starting point in getting that college now.
Yeah, I mean, I think this can happen in cases. So the case I'm most familiar with, I believe, is Harvard. I think that the reason why they ended up winning that case in the Supreme Court is because they weren't going by, they didn't change like here are our admissions and we're going to get so many white people, so many black people, etc. I think the reason why they did that is because they had like their 95% of admissions were like untouched, like this is how we're going to admit people. But then they had set aside on the other side some special exceptions. So it was like athletes, families of staff members, and then at this place is where they had like some affirmative action if they wanted to take in more people people that didn't get into the primary admissions, they'll take them in on the side here. I think that programs like that are generally okay. Especially if you've got like grant funding like set aside for something like that wouldn't otherwise be there just to accept more white kids. I do agree that like I said, like doing like displacement stuff where, we have to hire 5 people and 3 of them have to be black, so we're going to pass over 3 more qualified white people. I don't think stuff like that is a very positive direction to go. It creates a lot of warranted resentment, and it just leaves a bad taste in everybody's mouth, and arguably it can make places less competitive and have negative outcomes. But I do think there is room to like for special money set aside for diversity issues that can like encourage people to fill out places otherwise that they might not have had the opportunity to do so.
Tom, you want to say something?
Yeah, I'll just like spam a couple points really quickly and provide absolutely no evidence. So first of all, on the drug question, there's a lot of evidence, I believe, to suggest that Black people are more likely to lie, even when the surveys are anonymous, on self-reported surveys about drug consumption, and they've found this at they've replicated this finding multiple times. They're also more likely to consume marijuana publicly, and they're more likely to buy from strangers, or not even strangers, but also from strangers, but also buy publicly and at corners or at social gatherings or things like that. Whereas like white people are more likely to buy from dispensaries and buy from like really close friends that they know. They're also far more likely to resist arrest, and they're also held in contempt of court at like a much higher rate. And you can just tell that they're much more likely to resist arrest and much more likely to be held in contempt of court if you look at the rates at which Black people kill cops, or the percentage of cop killers that Black people make up versus the percentage of cop killers that are of any other particular race. And I think when you control for, they also have like much higher recidivism rates. So I think when you control, and like if you look at the national crime victimization surveys, they map on like almost 1-to-1 with the arrest rates, which shows that an appropriate amount of Black people are being arrested relative to the rate at which they commit crimes. And now if you want to say something like, well, they only commit crimes because of systemic poverty or this and that and the other, or whatever, or lack of educational opportunity, then that's another question. But it takes the police brutality aspect of the question out of sync. And then I have more points to be making on like education and stuff. But just if you want to respond to that, then yeah.
I feel like I'm getting a pace bin of stuff. So in terms of like, it wouldn't surprise me if there was a difference in the habits of consumptions of drugs between like Black and white people. Like that wouldn't surprise me. But my assumption would be that these things have like cultural or social roots that these kind of stem from, which are kind of shaped like pretty environmentally. Like, so for instance, like one of the things you bring up, like the idea that buying from a dispensary as a white person, you're more likely to do that. Unless things have changed dramatically since I was buying weed as a kid, dispensaries are quite a bit more expensive than buying weed on the street. So like that wouldn't surprise me that white people are more likely to buy from a dispensary than somebody else. In terms of like more likely to buy marijuana publicly or in a public area, like that might be the case, or it might just be public areas that are more likely to be policed by cops. Like, we would have to go through like all of these points, but like without having to go through all of them, I don't think we need to. I think the question at the end of the day is like, there's like one of 2 different types of people. So like you can either believe that Black people are more likely to be adversarial to cops or have higher recidivism or more likely to victimize each other because of like social factors that have contributed to this, that there's like a pretty adversarial history between Black people and society or Black people and the police, or you can believe that there's some innate quality of a Black person that predisposes them towards that. If you believe in the former, like I do, then you seek to reform and move society in a direction as much as you can to make it so that those people feel more accommodated, so that crime and other things aren't in the equation for them. If you believe in the latter, then I don't know if you push for eugenics or the deportation of all Black people. I don't know at that point like what the plan is, but
a person who, I'm not saying necessarily because I believe in the latter, but I'm just saying a person who does believe in the latter would then be of, probably if they're a decent or compassionate human being, would be of the disposition then that if it is something, I don't know, like a genetic quality or something, then this would contribute to having even more sympathy, because it's not environmentally determined, and these people aren't like it's not like Ben Shapiro anymore, where he's like, oh, why don't you just like wait to have kids until you're out of high school or something like that. And then it's like then it's like
wait, having more, what was that word you said? Having more what?
Kids.
Or no, wait, before, I'm sorry, I should have said you said having more center fee, or what was the word? I missed it.
Oh, sympathy, I said.
Sympathy. Okay, gotcha.
You would be more inclined to, like, for instance, I think some of the highest points of Black prosperity in America came when they were owning substantially more small businesses, or were engaged more in like trades based fields, or had social incentives to be like pursuing these kinds of careers. Like I'm not saying that I believe in any sort of like genetic quality or anything, but I don't think that that mutually excludes you from having some sort of compassionate and humanitarian response.
Yeah, I mean, that's possible, but that is incredibly rarely the case. And oftentimes just takes you down dark
True.
roads where like if you want to treat like a population of people like they're retarded because of their skin color, like, and you just want to have sympathy for it. Like, I don't know, that gets us to good policy positions. I would rather like seek to reform institutions that we know positively impact people's lives. So for instance, having well-funded schools with extracurricular activities just generally have a really positive impact on everybody's life. I think you would move in that direction first before just writing somebody off and like, oh, well, genetic differences, like, let's just look at them like it's a museum and just be sad for them.
Okay, all right.
Ask
Well,
you a quick question, Tom.
yeah, ask him. Oh, yeah.
For you, yeah. I read the stat. I don't know when I read it, but it said like something like 77% of the black households are single mother, and I think that plays a big role to the things that you stated, right? That with no father figure, a lot of these kids are forced to adapt a harsher, lifestyle, harsher way of thinking, and it oftentimes gets them into trouble. And I just want to hear your thoughts about that. Like, what in your, to me, I think that that's a big reason as to why they have such, inflated crime statistics. It's because they like a father figure, they like direction, something that puts them on the right track in life. And I just want to hear why you think that is. Is it because of it's already been like that? Is there something that's causing it to be like that? I just want to see what you think about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, that definitely contributes. I mean, a big problem that we have to talk about, and this is like something here's what I'm meaning to say is that we don't have to weigh in on whether or not, in my opinion, whether or not this is like explicitly environmental or genetic. I mean, even constructing the question in such a way is kind of silly, because what organisms are fundamentally is our genetics expressed in an environment. So asking whether or not something is environmental or genetically determined is like sort of like, I don't know, like looking at a footprint and saying like what percentage of that footprint stems from the mud being soft and what percentage of that footprint stems from somebody stomping in the mud. It's like, it's sort of like a silly like question to be posing in the first place. So yeah, I mean, with regards to single motherhood, I think that the issues which are driving Black people like that are suppressing general socioeconomic status are similar issues to what is suppressing in general most people, except perhaps they get the brunt of it, perhaps even more so. And I don't know if that's due to systemic racism. I would suspect that that's due to just the precarious position of being like a blue collar worker in a major American city, as our politicians completely hollow us out and sell us out to mass migration and domestic and offshoring, domestic manufacturing, and et cetera. So that's my point there. And then also, if you want to talk about education, I would just generally say that you can find per pupil spending studies, and you can see that between districts, wider school districts get more money. But that, and this is I guess where Destiny could like start, like if you want to make a debate about that. Between school districts, wider school districts tend to get more money, but that's largely a byproduct of property taxes. And within school districts, however, even those wider school districts allocate funding to more non-white schools. And then as a measure of pure pupil spending, after you take into account grants and like federal level funding as well as state level allocations, you actually find that pure pupil spending for non-white students tends to be slightly higher than for white students, as well as more non-white school districts. These sort of more like compromised school districts tend to have even more highly educated instructors. And I mean, I can give you studies for this, but yeah, if you'd like me to give you studies for this.
Yeah, I mean, schools are only one part of the equation. In terms of schools being funded by property taxes, that's true, but that's not really an argument against like environmental issues are kind of like messing up how our education works. If anything, I would say that funding schools by property taxes is just probably a greater driver of inequality. If you live in a wealthy area, then you go to a wealthy school. If you live in a poor area, you go to a shitty school. It might be that maybe within certain districts with high percentages of white people, there are there might be some schools that get more money proportionally funded to them. But the idea that black schools in general in America, like on an aggregate, get more funding to them than white schools, I don't believe that's true. And is that the claim that you're making, or are you making a more final claim?
The claim that I'm making is that even if school districts don't get more money, at the end of the day, on a pure pupil level, the pure pupil spending for non-white students is higher than the pure pupil spending for whiter students.
The pure people spend the per
yeah, per pupil. Sorry, it's just my accent.
No, that's fine. The per pupil spending for white people is higher than the per pupil spending for higher for black people than per pupil spending for white people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that would be an interesting stat to look at, but
yeah, sure. Here, let me pull it up for you. I'm rattling these off the top of my head, so let me link them. In the meantime, I guess you can. Okay, yeah, here, I've got them actually. Here, I'm gonna like spam some studies in the chat if you want to riff off of anything else.
Well, just like the one particular one you get, because I can't read everything right now. It's just like the one specific you're talking about. I'm interested.
Okay, so here, let me find this right now. So this is Murray and Rubin 2008 from taxpolicycenter.org. That I found, and here you can look at it right here. The finding says it basically calculated the pure pupil spending in schools between the years 1972 and 2002, and they found that, quote, in 1972 the ratio of non-white to white spending was 0.98. This trend had been reversed by 1982, as spending per pupil for non-white students was slightly higher than for white students in most cases, and in the United States as a whole it has been for the past 20 years. And then Rich Wine 2011, this was a study that the Heritage Foundation did. I know, bad source, but here's the study. Just look at the data. They found that it was 1% greater for black students than it was 1% greater pure pupil spending for black students than spending on white or Hispanic students. And there's a table in there that I would reference you to, table 1 B2548, that it says pure pupil spending, public education spending by race and ethnic group.
Okay, wait. There's no chance that I can go through like a whole pay spin of stuff, right? So I don't know why you were just, but let me just I'm just kind of looking through this first one.
Okay.
Hold on, give me just 1 second. You guys can chat if you want, right?
Yeah, and hey, if you find any errors in the data, let me know. Like I try to pride myself on trying to take just interested in the truth and etc. So, but yeah, Spider, did that answer your question sufficiently? Or yeah, I do believe, and I think that the nuclear family is the single greatest weapon we have against poverty. And I think if you look at things like Hungary has implemented under Orban, these like pro-natalist, pro-family policies where they're heavily socially incentivizing people through financial gains to settle down and have families and etc. This really allows for a passing on of social capital, training and funding that is unprecedented and would lead to really, really happy and healthy.
Orban is doing it because the emigration rate, more people are leaving Hungary than people are coming in. Hungary is in pretty bad shape. And I mean, the spending difference doesn't really seem too great. You're only saying like 1% larger or like, slightly larger. It doesn't make too much of a difference. If I'm spending like $1, what's 1 more cent going to do? If I'm spending $10,000, what's $10,100 going to do? I do believe in a strong nuclear family is a good place for moral, I know for sure my dad helped raise me right. And, if I didn't have a dad, I would be, a bit slightly worse off. But so I do agree with you on that. But, the whole, slightly bigger than this spending, it just doesn't really kind of make too much sense. It's not significant enough to make a difference in my eyes, at least. Right. I mean, you got to see what's causing it, what it causes and how you can fix it and make it better. You know what I mean? That's what I
guess the fundamental question here would be, I don't know if Destiny is more nuanced in this question, but do you believe that people are interchangeable, as in like if we had a control group of like blacks and whites, like 50 blacks, 50 whites, put 50 blacks in one control group and 50, like one control, center or whatever, and 50 whites in another one, do you think that they would outcome in the same society? Like they have the same achievements, same cultural icons, same fans, or do you think there's something like deeper in these people, or are they just all interchangeable?
I don't think any one person is interchangeable with any one other person. I mean, we all have some traits that are like some biologically innate to us, but as a group of people, I wouldn't imagine trading like 50 whites with 50 blacks should produce something significantly different. But if you trade out any one person from another, then there might be like a difference, whether it's a white person with a white person or a white person with a black person.
Right. I guess what I was asking is that do you think fundamentally between these groups that there are significant differences or differences that we can point out that would lead into different outcomes in society? Like, as they always say that like blacks commit 50% of the crime below 30% of the population. As in there's some sort of an like integral quality of blacks that makes them different from whites and that they'll respond to social activities differently.
Not for like super big differences like that. No, I don't think so. I think that for some like more specific traits, like how much sunscreen someone needs to wear, maybe. But when it comes to like, I guess like the more polygenetic a trait tends to be. So when we talk about something like intelligence, probably less likely to find differences between groups of people than something that might be controlled by a single gene. So like I think something like height is a lot more easily determined by very few genes versus like larger social traits.
Okay. Do you think that the descriptions between or the distinctions between blacks and white IQ or like disparities are all just purely social? Do you think there's just some genetic play in there?
I don't know anybody knows the answer to that right now. Like when it comes to the study of intelligence, it's a very, very, very contentious field. It's very difficult to know because we can't run experiments on people, obviously. But I think that right now, as it stands, I think it's best to just treat it completely environmentally and then just kind of like move forward in that direction. There doesn't seem to be super strong evidence one way or another. So I think we just kind of like move forward, assuming that like everybody is malleable and then we carve people out the way we want them to be.
I tend to agree with you, Destiny, on that. It does seem though that one problem with particularly environmental explanations is that if we make that presupposition, then any disparity between any two groups is either chalked up to just like the whole, like just like traits associated with like tendencies associated with that group, which I think seems kind of unfair, and to people to just assume that an entire group of people is like intentionally like being like not getting ahead or not taking advantage of their opportunities seems like a cruel thing to say about people. And then the flip side of that, the other interpretation is that if there is any difference or variation, then you would just say, well, it's the fault of institutions. Those are the only two coins. Those are the only two sides of the coin you have if you assume environmental. At least that's how it seems to me. So, ultimately, my curiosity just is in. I just like love the American nation and I want it to survive, and I'm interested in providing prosperity to all people. So I'm not trying to like stake any particular claim, and also as a Christian I believe in the universal like dignity of all human beings and that we're all equal before God. So that's my other.
Yeah, so I think the idea that something is caused heavily by environmental factors doesn't make it intentional. We're all products of our environment, well, you know, white people and black people alike. The idea that a certain group of people is suffering or failing to get ahead, I don't think means that they're like, if you say that like you guys are products of your environments, that's like a making fun of them or making them feel bad. I think that it would be far worse to imply that there's something fundamentally off or broken about an entire group of people rather than assuming like, hey, there's probably some structural or environmental things we can change. It might be at some point in the future that we arrive at some like that there might be some differences between groups of people. That might be possible. Who knows? I'm not like, I don't think anybody knows where the future of genetics research on intelligence or other highly polygenetic traits are, but to just assume that it can't be changed structurally, I think is a mistake. I think that we can do a lot structurally still. There's still a ton of stuff we can do. Like if you go through like certain black neighborhoods and the school gym is flooded, you know, I don't think any type of like genetic difference is going to help somebody, you know, play basketball underwater. So, I mean, as long as we still have these problems that we can fix, we should just continue fixing these problems. And then, you know, once we've reached some level of parity or equity in society and we see there are certain gaps still, then I mean, we can move at it from that point, but we're not even close to that yet. So why consider it?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I agree. And once again, I'm not. I don't know if anybody else in this chat is. I'm not really asserting the genetic case at all. I see that there are general things which raise the prosperity of all people who live in this country, and those are the things that I'm more interested in pursuing. But otherwise, yeah. What are some solutions that you think are to this issue?
I mean, when we talk about like success with a capital S, broadly speaking, there's a lot that goes into that. I think we correctly identified earlier that family issues are a big thing. So having more reproductive control is very, very, very important. Giving birth to a single child or a child in a single parent household is obviously really bad. The outcomes associated with that are bad on a number of levels, educationally, criminally, even health-wise. So like giving people more access to birth control or the right to abortion or just more like reproductive health, I think is a really strong starting area. From there, there's like 50 million other things that we can identify. The disparity between education between rich schools and poor schools, unfortunately, I had to spend more time digging through these studies, but I know from personal experience that poor schools suck compared to wealthy schools. Like my son goes to a wealthy school because I moved to a wealthy school district because I know firsthand that the rich school has way better resources than the poor school. So like having access to the same resources educationally would probably help different people catch up.
What resources are you speaking about particularly?
Sure. So the availability of before and after school care is a big one that my son relies on. That's one. Okay. The availability of technology in the classroom, that's two. That's huge. The availability of technology outside of the classroom is huge. That's three. So for instance, my kids' schools were all shut down over the pandemic for a large portion of the year. Every single student in my kids' classroom was able to take home an iPad, which blew my fucking mind. That was unbelievable to me. So they have iPads assigned from school. So like having access to those types of things, I think gives you like a huge head start on other students that just don't have access to those types of things. When I think back to my school education, so not my son's, but my personal, like your school having the availability of things like after school tutors, IB or AP classes or dual enrollment courses or honors courses or way better facilities. I think I went back to my high school recently. Their gym has like 30 power racks. It's like fucking unreal. Like these types of things are so awesome to have in your school. The extracurriculars that are available. If you go to a wealthy school, you get a brand new instrument assigned to you. You don't have to buy one yourself. You don't get some shitty hand-me-down. I go on and on and on. There's like a million different things that like resources that a really nice school has that a poor school just won't have for their students. And I think these things like make real difference in the lives of those students. So we've only barely talked about family, and then we barely talked about school. There's more we can go into there. Another big dimension is going to be like our criminal justice system. I think that the entire DEA scheduling on drugs is a disaster. As soon as you throw somebody in jail, you've entered them into a system that's going to fuck them over for many more years. So when we're locking up people for stuff related to like marijuana, this is an equity issue. It needs to stop. It's stupid. It's a waste of our money. It's a waste of everybody's time, and it hurts families because when a black man is in prison, we don't have a black father, which is something we complained about earlier, right? So I think that like there's just like three things off the top of my head that could be changed that would like dramatically improve outcomes for people's lives in the United States, and we can go into a ton of different other things as well. But
yeah, I think the second critique of this would be the appeal to tradition and appeal to Americanism in general. Is that when we enact these more equalizing systemic problems, we try to correct these systemic problems and equalize it, is that a lot of the times it results in destruction of the traditional American like concepts or morality that we have. Like, for example, like a small example would be the Redskins. The Redskins now, since that implies some sort of racial connotation with it, because we're trying to move to a more equal society, we're going to have to destroy these constructs that have enacted things like the Redskins and stuff like how Thomas Jefferson is a racist and fundamentally the American ideology is racist. And now we have to move into this kind of inversion of the American values because America was built off this kind of racialist system and everything in society is racist. Like, how would you respond to that? That everything that we know is going to be destroyed because fundamentally America was founded with racialist founding fathers, with people with like racialist views, and a lot of the systems we have today are all going to be in some sort of way racialist, though. If we go to the logical conclusion of your ideology, like almost everything that we have in America to achieve like equality, which would be destroy all these racial institutions and act like a very different fundamental American conception.
So, I mean, I feel like that's one of our greatest strengths in the United States is recognizing that our founding was flawed in so many ways. For some reason, people seem to view that as a weakness, that like, oh, we can't admit that anything in America was bad. Like, no, our founding fathers were all purple. Well, no, of course not. They were super flawed. And a lot of our founding ideals were super flawed. And a lot of our founding father figures, a lot of early society in the United States had a lot of problems with it. But they gave us like these really awesome and amazing tools in order to make changes to our society over time. And I think that's one of the greatest strengths that we've had as a country. It's why we have, I believe, the oldest surviving in-use constitution anywhere on the planet. Like we have a constitution that regulates things that happen in outer space through the amendment process. So like I think that it's okay. We can simultaneously recognize that there were a lot of problems with the founding of our country, and then we can work to build a more perfect union. Like that's just something that we do over time. We don't have to throw out every single throw out every single old like person like, oh, like Jefferson is bad now, because of, relationships with slavery, this guy's bad or whatever. Like we can recognize that these people were flawed, but I think the more important thing to recognize is that they were flawed, so we can change it, and we should continue to do so, right? We just continue to change laws as things go on to make our country an equitable and better place.
So do you believe that there is like a historic American like people or identity that has been passed down throughout the centuries that we still carry on to this day?
Nah, not from 300 years ago or whatever. No, I don't think so. I think that cultures all over the planet have like shifted and molded and changed over time. Like it's really hard to, especially America, where it's like, I think it's really hard to point to like one tradition that's like stuck.
So you don't think like the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant kind of ethic or founding has any meaning today?
No, I mean, even at that, I wish I could remember this. Even at that, there were 4 distinct American groups that were here in the beginning. I'm not gonna be able to remember, but like in the very beginning, there were like 4 distinct American groups and like cultures that revolved around these, and then over time, these kind of changed and merged, and the idea that there was like some shared like. It's just such a misreading of American history. I know this because I debated Fuentes once on this, and I went back and I did more reading on American history than I ever had. And there were so many disagreements in early U.S. history. Like we had to propagandize each other just to get us to come together as like as an actual country, because the cultures and the differences between the states was so dramatic, and the different views that we had of different religious groups was so dramatic. I wouldn't agree. I think it's a misreading of history that we have like. This one fundamental culture that has carried on throughout all of American history. I think and I think it's important to recognize that, because I think one of our biggest strengths in American history is the ability to have brought together so many groups of people and to get them to work together. And I think that to some extent, that's kind of why we took this hegemonic, leader of the free world role, is because we were able to integrate and get so many different groups of people to work together. I think it's one of our greatest strengths.
Do you think in this process of like, coming together, that because a lot of these time it kind of necessarily indicates that it would be a destruction or one culture taking over another, that this just fundamentally breeds resent or some sort of like cultural clash, like as you see today, where we have a lot of more resentment from whites as to how they're treating society because they see their culture, their founding ethic, or their historical nation as this state being taken over from like a black or a POC kind of vision of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are tons of different types of clashes. I think that it's really important to be intersectional when we look at the different clashes that exist in society, because I think when you just try to roll with one thing, you end up missing so much of the story. Like, to say that there's a clash between like people of color and whites, I think misses so much of so many other types of clashes. Like, I think that there are fundamentally larger clashes in society than racial ones. 2 that I can think of off the top of my head are, there's a huge clash between rural people and city people. Like, holy shit, a black and a white person that live in San Francisco are going to have way more in common than a white person that lives in California, than in San Francisco, and a white person that lives in like rural Nebraska. These 2 people are going to be totally different breeds of people, both as white people. And then even like a black person that lives in rural fucking Alabama or Louisiana is going to be way different than a black person from fucking LA or Miami. These people are going to be way different. So I think like that's one lens that we can look at things through. We can also look at things through a class lens. Like, a very wealthy person is probably generally going to have more in common with a very wealthy person than they will with like a very poor person, even within a city or even within a rural area. So, I mean, like, is there like a clash between races in the United States sometimes? Like, absolutely, of course there is. And there's lenses by which we can analyze that. But there are also like cultural divides in terms of like people that live in cities and rural communities, and people that, make different amounts of money, people that live in different communities in the United States. People that are part of the LGBT or not community. Like, yeah, there's tons of different like, diametric systems like that.
Right. I just kind of pitch in real quick a little bit, a lot of the U.S., a lot of the western part of the U.S., Texas, California, and like most of the West belonged to Mexico at one point, right? And, I believe it's because, the American side won and not the Mexican side, that side is, the victor gets to write the history, if you think about it, right? And that's why I suppose the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant are, the established people in this land, right? That's a way that you can say, right? If Mexico had won, it would be the other way around. We'd be speaking Spanish right now instead of English, and I think it would be more on the other way around. So I think a lot of these racial clashes against the whites would be against, I suppose, people rebelling that, these people are succeeding and we're not, and we're trying to make our voices heard, if you think about it, right? That's just
I guess I just like I hate looking at that because I feel like that's a hijacked narrative. Like if you're a poor white person and somebody's convinced you that like immigrants or minorities are your enemy, you're so fucked. And I think that, like, ironically enough, I'll give some credit to newer age, like more savvy Republicans or even populist fascists at recognizing that. That, you know, even if we go over to the kind of fascist side, like Fuentes isn't going to lie to you and tell you that like immigrants are your biggest problem. Like he'll identify that corporations are a big problem. Or if we look at somebody like Tucker Carlson or Charlie Kirk, like these like new age Republicans, or even arguably Donald Trump's rhetoric, that like these people aren't going to sit here and tell you it's only immigrants that are messing with you, that that it can be like a corporatism or wealthy people that are doing it. So yeah, I totally understand that there can be, again, there's a lot of different clashes that are set up and experienced in society for a variety of different reasons, and we can look at all of those. But to try to just paint one primary clash and say like it's all like this is why I fight with socialists and communists. It's like, oh, it's only about class. That's the only thing that matters. Well, I don't know, man. Race is pretty important sometimes, or like where you live is pretty important sometimes. Or for people that are so hung up on race, like I think it's all about race relations, and it's like, I don't know, man. Like a poor white person and a poor black person probably have a closer lived experience together than like a multi-millionaire, you know, athlete or a multimillionaire white person that inherited oil money. I think it's important to keep in mind there's a lot of lenses that we can look at our existence through, and to just rely on one means you're going to miss so much from the other.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah. I was just giving one point of view. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree in the sense of I've never really thought about the conflicts of America being in any way primarily racial or even secondarily racial. And I think that we need to really be moving forward with an understanding. I mean, like, I hate how people on the right wing, like, even if you're against immigration, the fact that like people on the right wing blame like immigrants for the position that they're in, it's like they did not choose to like nobody wants to just pack up and like sacrifice everything and sacrifice their culture and their people and, you know, come work in like the massive sprawling McDonald's, like I don't like just disgusting institution to like send back remittances, like you know. And so I think that, but the people who are engineering that are fundamentally I mean fundamentally they're capitalists. And so for any sort of like substantive American national like renewal to occur, it involves opposing capitalists in many ways, the thing that's disrupting the national spirit, like the like movement of America's success, is the fundamental incentives carried with by major leading capitalists. So I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, it can be, but like other people will unwittingly carry these things along religious lines or along racial lines as well. They'll carry the same messages.
But I think that it's definitely, I mean, I think that like black people have contributed like substantially to the development of like American culture and the American ideal, and trying to like alienate any particular like race of people that exists in America is fundamentally destructive to the underlying principles, which I think are supposed to be holding the nation together. So I definitely, even if I may disagree that like there's systemic factors which are like actively suppressing certain races of people down in a particular way, I think that these are often just and you may disagree with me, but I think that these are often just distractions to the things that we need to be looking like these class resentments that are the primary divisions. Are you eating peanuts? What are you eating?
Fuck, I didn't know you could do that. Sorry, yeah.
What are you eating?
Yeah, it's a mixed nut thing, yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, you big peanuts fan?
Well, I'm trying not to eat cookies and shit because I get fucking fat, so.
Oh, really? Yeah. I appreciate. Can we get a N in chat for peanuts? A P in chat for peanuts? A P in chat for peanuts, everybody?
Optics moment. Okay, so
oh no, I didn't mean it like that. I meant.
I was like, yeah. Okay. Okay, so the last topic, since it's we're already an hour in, I didn't mean to keep you this long, but I did want to get to just social conservatism in general and your kind of problem with that philosophy, because social conservatism seems to be the main or rising ethic of conservatism now, and we have new leaders that are rising, like you said, Tucker Carlson practically being the new kind of leader, and Donald Trump being the new leader of the right wing, and social conservatism being like the main line, or is a more critique of capitalism, but not necessarily socialism, and a more invoking of like tradition and kind of the old ways. So what is your main problem with like, I don't know, like traditional marriage or any sort of like appeal to tradition that the right wing has commonly been invoking nowadays?
So my biggest problem, so I'm a big fan of like, I think the process is called like analysis and synthesis. So we take apart a system and we kind of look at all of its different parts to figure out why it is the way that it is. And then we synthesize those understandings. We put them back together in a way that gives us like a better understanding or appreciation of those things. And sometimes it feels like people are really scared to analyze systems because they don't want to question things that they believe are just true. And I think that leads us to like lose out on how we could have a better understanding of things to make our lives better. So if somebody wants to live like a tradcon lifestyle, if you want to be a woman, you live in a house and you do your thing, you have a kid, you're the home taker, the man is a money earner, like I think that's fine. If you want to do that, that's cool. But I think it's sad if you do that because you think it's the only option available to you. But I would be critical on the other end as well, because I know that there's probably some of you that are like biting to say this, is that like women largely I think are unhappier today than they were 40 or 50 years ago. And probably a large part of that is being like thrown into the world that like men previously inhabited, that it's not actually like the funnest thing in the world to have to attend school, have to get a degree, have to work a stressful job, have to do a 9 to 5. Like these aren't like super fun things. Like no, like men don't necessarily like these things either. So like I think it's so driving people to do something because you think you have to be a feminist, you have to do this, you have to represent blah blah blah. I think that's equally a mistake. I wish that people were capable of like tearing apart systems and like looking at how they work and then trying to figure out like, well, how would I like to fit in this system, rather than feeling like they have a commitment to a particular system, and if they don't exist within it, they feel like this horrible like dysphoria in society where they don't fit in and they feel shitty and they feel bad. And that's all I'm saying. So if somebody wants to be a tradcon, go for it, but don't be a tradcon because you feel like you have to be a tradcon or you're like living some immoral or unethical lifestyle. And if you want to be non-traditional, if you want to be a polyamorous, pansexual, transgender, vegan, whatever, well then do it. If that makes you happy, like go for it. But don't do it because you feel like you have to like cut against the grain. You want to rebel against your religious parents.
Okay, yeah, I guess this gets back to the dialectic of you and Tom talking about kind of the fundamental, our philosophy just being different. But now with how it is today, a lot of the social liberalism or social conservatism is a lot more institutionalized, as in the government's kind of pinning a position that society should have or inculcate. So in terms of that, not just talking about like what the individual does in his own bedroom and stuff like that, but do you think that it is beneficial to push for like social liberalism in the government? Like, would you be advocating for that?
I think that the best thing to push for, and this is like a pipe dream, I don't know if anybody cares about this. I think the best thing to push for is to have an understanding of why you desire the things that you desire. Make sure that you don't desire a particular thing because some religious institution has forced it upon you. Make sure that you don't desire a particular thing because some large company is demanding that you buy their product. Make sure that you don't desire a particular thing because, you know, like some liberal tells you that if you're monogamous, you know, you're a loser or something. Like that's kind of the only thing that I wish for. Maybe this is like on my very core. I'm like ultra, like, but my classical liberalism is coming out here, like giving people all the information you can so that they can make the choices that they most freely identify with, so that they can pursue what makes them happy. I think that's what we should focus on. It's like equipping people with the skills and tools they need to figure out, you know, like what will make me happy in a society. I think that largely a lot of this was kind of given to us and taken for granted. So I think religion represents a really good example of like, here's where we had a lot of tools that like made us happy, but we didn't really think about any of them. So as we moved to like a increasingly secular society, we lost a lot of those tools, but we didn't really think about it. All we thought about was like, fuck religion, that's lame. And then we lost like the whole sense of community and the whole sense of charity and all of the things that came along with like religious structures. And I think that's a mistake. Like forfeiting all of that to the world of theology and just saying, oh, well, fuck all that, it's theology, so it's bad, I think is really stupid. Like that's an example of a failure of analysis and synthesis. The analysis was there. We understood that like, oh, well, maybe religious doctrine is bad, maybe it has these outcomes, blah, 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 blah. But you didn't do enough analysis. You didn't realize, well, maybe the community part is really good. Maybe the charity part is awesome. Maybe seeing all of your friends and family and having like a common belief and a common system and a common purpose of life, maybe that was good. We didn't do any of the synthesis there. We didn't put that back together in a way that made sense. So now we're all just kind of aimless and miserable.
So would you believe that history is a sequence of like dialectical conflicts, and you know each one is like a thesis and there's like an antithesis and it creates like a synthesis?
No, I don't. I don't believe. I don't subscribe to more like grand narratives. I would argue you can analyze history through a million different lenses. I don't know if there's like some grand tale that tells a story relating to any particular thing, or there is, but you could set up a million of them. I would say.
All right. Does anybody else have any more questions? Because we're going to start wrapping this up. I kept them way longer than I thought I was going to. But any questions for Destiny before we end?
I mean, do you have any like, do you think that there's any empirical fact of the matter over the stretch of an entire society about what sorts of marriage structures and social institutions make people happier? And also, given that human beings are pretty mimetic, like just mimetic individuals, it seems that we need to be, whenever we're deciding laws, if we don't want certain like behaviors or social formations to become explicitly normalized, then it seems that we need to be socially encouraging other kinds. So just saying like, oh, well, anybody can do what anybody wants. Well, you know, eventually that leads to, I think, that doesn't, that like one like sort of social structure will inevitably end up like winning out, or just because people are like very mimetic and normalize certain tendencies. So do you think there's any like fact of the matter about which sorts of social formations yield positive results in terms of marriage and etc.?
Yeah, there must be some state in which most people can do a particular set of actions that maximizes the happiness of most people. That must be some state that exists. It seems to be the case. It's just a matter of figuring out what that is a very challenging process, and I would argue it's probably something that changes over time. You know, even religious institutions in the way that they function, you know, have changed over time. And these are, you know, atheists always say religion never changes. That's why it's not science. But that's not true, actually. Religious doctrine and the interpretations of such have definitely changed over time. So I think it's just a matter of us trying to figure out, you know, what makes people happier and what gets us to a better end state. And yeah, that's a bunch of empirical work. It's a lot of philosophical work. What makes us happier is probably a moving target. You know, the things that
I give you a little bit of just for you to take, like, you don't need to read it on stream or anything because you need to get on to something else. But like, because I'm of the opinion that traditional marriages tend to yield the best outcomes in terms of personal happiness, but also just social happiness. So can I link you any studies?
Well, I mean, like you can say that, but I know that there are a lot of individuals that would disagree with their lives, that they wouldn't want to be a part of like that traditional structure. So, I mean, it seems like there are people that would choose otherwise. But it wouldn't surprise me if societies that existed in some static realm where these were traditional relationships, like that was like optimal, but in that particular point in time. But it could be that after some, you know, flux, after some, you know, irregularity or some up and down, that maybe the new society that we settle at produces better outcomes than the prior one. I mean, it just depends on like your relative level of social stability or anything.
Okay. All right.
Any other questions for Destiny before we end this call?
What would your ideal vision of America look like?
In what, like economically or like
just if you could submit a picture of it in like 3 sentences or less.
Fuck. That's
or more. I mean, just a paragraph. Yeah. Just give me.
I guess so. My biggest problem with people in general is I think that people have very low self-esteem, and I think more fundamentally, I don't think people don't really spend a lot of time thinking about what makes them happy. I think that, and this might be a pipe dream, I think that generally in society we inherit what we think are those drives from other people. So maybe our pastor tells us that happiness is, you know, whatever drives us to God, or maybe our parents tell us that happiness is going to school and being a lawyer and a doctor, or maybe a company tells us that happiness is having like the newest, coolest car or a pair of shoes, or, you know, maybe a computer forum tells you that happiness is having the best graphics card, right? I think we don't spend enough time like truly being reflective and meditative and thinking like, well, what actually drives me happy? I think that if we were able to have like a higher level of introspection and we were able to engage with ourselves in more honest levels to think about like, okay, you know, like this is something that would make me happy. I don't need to have the highest paying job. I don't need to go and move to one of 5 cities in the United States. You know, I don't need to do this and this and this that this company is telling me to. I don't have to worship a God to do this, right? I think that if we spent some time analyzing ourselves and being more introspective, I feel like that would lead to like better outcomes across the board in almost every area of our lives. And then I guess to take it one step further, or a more applied version of that, like I wish people were more tolerant of other people's viewpoints, that we could understand each other better, rather than like, you know, this person said this joke, so I know that they're a racist, hateful fucking piece of shit who should never blah, 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 right? Or rather than like, you know, this person, you know, dyed their hair blue, so I know that it's some immoral hippie, polyamorous, polygamous, disgusting transgender person who hates family values, blah, blah. I wish that we were better at kind of understanding like how much we have shared with each other. And then, yeah, I think that those are like the two big things, that we were better at understanding each other and understanding ourselves, I guess, broadly speaking. Yeah.
So just like from the picture that you paint, it sounds like just complete liberation of the individual through acceleration of social comfort to a point where there are no constraints by duty or obligation or society or morality, and you can sort of just spend all the time you want in your comfort, so long as you never like have to engage with any sort of identity or obligation, like consuming and like doing whatever you want. That's kind of like what it sounds to me. Is that?
Yeah, so that would be like a really good example of analysis with no synthesis. So like analysis might be that like, man, working fucking sucks and I don't want to ever have to work again. I'm going to go live in a commune and fuck this. I'm just going to go live in a commune and drink tea all day. But like, I think when you break that concept apart a little bit more, well, why do we have to work? Well, there's some jobs that are like socially necessary. Like we need to do things to move society along. And I think that when we synthesize these ideas together and we bring everything back together, it's like, okay, I don't need to go to school to become a doctor or a lawyer, because that's not going to make me happy. Maybe I just want to go to school to study music because maybe that makes me happy. I really love music, so I'm going to go to school to music. But I understand that like in order to keep society running and everything, I also need to contribute as well. So maybe I'll go get a job in a restaurant. And so, I'll work in the restaurant because that's my obligation to society to keep things running smoothly. But I'll also go to school for music because I really love that. And I think being able to balance those two things out, like doing what makes you happy and then fulfilling whatever obligation you have to keep society running along smoothly, I think that that's like two parts of the same coin. You can't just do one without the other, because if everybody decided they just wanted to drink tea and dreadlock their hair all day, I mean society's going to fall apart and nobody's going to have any tea to drink.
Well, thank you for the conversation. I'll let Kaden end it but nonetheless, thank you for giving your time and streaming us having this conversation. And I am very appreciative. I've been following your content for a very long time, so it's been cool to kind of talk to you about this.
Cool. Well,
yeah, same here. I've followed you for a pretty long time, so I was pretty happy to get this running. But thank you for being here. Thank you for talking to us.
What was the peanut thing? I have no idea. I don't know. That's kind of weird. I know you just said it, but what's it called? Something. Okay, I'm sorry. So I previously used the term deconstruction a lot, but somebody emailed me. Some angry philosophy guy emailed me, and it's like, technically, what you're talking about is not deconstruction. The terms you're looking for is synthesis and analysis. So I looked these up, and that seems to more closely fit how I describe. So when I say synthesis and analysis, or analysis and synthesis, what I'm talking about is like taking apart something, analyzing all of its fundamental underlying structures, and then synthesis is like putting all of these things back together again. So I'm trying to use those terms more rather than deconstruction, because I think deconstruction implies something for Foucault, some other bullshit philosophers nobody cares about. Okay, fuck those guys. I don't even know. I tried to look up more specifically what deconstruction is, and it's such a meme that like I don't even think the guy defines it. Like when you look up like what is deconstruction or deconstructionism, it's just like a whole bunch. Well, deconstructionism, it's not this and it's not that and it's not that. Oh, is it Derrida? I don't know how to pronounce this loser's name. It's not a method. It's not a critique. It's not an analysis. It's like deconstruction is like wine for fucking philosophy. All right, fuck. I don't know. Fuck that. So fuck it. So now we use synthesis or analysis and synthesis. Okay. There we go. Could you give an example of how you would use synthesis and analysis practically? I think that there's a great value in taking apart any particular idea. Man, what can I... Every time I think of this, I just think of sex examples. It's not the best thing to do. Let's think about it. Okay, I can think about it musically, okay? This is a good example. So in music, there are songs that you just like. And it's like, oh, cool, I like that song. Huh, cool, I guess I like that song. Oh, these things like. If you undergo like a more formal study of music, though, you might be able to take apart aspects of a song and figure out like why you like aspects of a song. You might be able to say like, oh shit, like, I like this because of this, and I like this because of this. And through that like more fundamental analysis, you might be able to then turn around and say like, you know what? Because I know this, I think I would really like these types of things. Now that I've like broken this apart and understood it better, one, I can get greater pleasure out of the things that I already enjoyed because I have a better understanding of them, which usually leads to more pleasure, I think. And then two, you can like find other things that are pleasurable in similar ways because now you have a greater understanding of what makes you enjoy those things so much. What was a W? word related to intersex that you were looking for but couldn't find? Hold on. XY chromosome woman. What's it called? Sewer syndrome? Swear? I don't know how to pronounce this. SWYER? I don't know how to pronounce it, but I think another good example would be with cooking. Oh yeah, for sure. Taking apart why recipes, what is in a recipe, and then changing it as a result of that, for sure. You know, analysis and synthesis has a super Marxist association, right? It might. It's just maybe. Is it a form of dialectic or something? I don't care. It doesn't make it inherently bad or good to me. 2 people in chat disagreed on DGG chat, so they disagree with you, YouTube. You think that the process of analysis and synthesis, as you put it, is something that everyone would be capable of? Is it possible an average person needs this given? I think that everybody should be capable of it. Yeah, I think so. I think that should be possible. Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed. Hey buddy, would you ever like to talk about Latinx on stream? No, fuck that.